The Haunting of Hill House is an amazing horror Netflix series that explores the themes of personal and familial trauma. Many have already commented on its story, the hidden ghosts, the explanation of each subplot for each episode. So in this video, I want to explore how The Haunting of Hill House frames femininity and masculinity through the concept of sensitivity or psychic powers, and how these elements in turn can make us understand the series better. In one of the many flashbacks looking back at the family living in Hill House, Olivia understands that Theo has started manifesting a certain gift and takes her aside, talking to her about how the women in the family are sensitive. While we understand that she's referring to some sort of psychic ability and its familiarity, the choice of the word sensitive and its association with womanhood do feel like a subtle commentary on the more heightened sensibility that girls are naturally and socially born into. For example, whereas all siblings, male and female, are shown to feel something in regards to Nell being back at Hill House and or dying, the women of the family are the only ones who manifest powers. Olivia can see the future, Theo can sense with her touch, Nell can travel through time, and Shirley has night visions. Capabilities that, if understood better and taken more into consideration by the male figures of the family, specifically Hugh and Stevie, could have perhaps saved them from Hill House. For example, in the very first episode of the series, Shirley talks in her sleep and mentions how one of her siblings is in the Red Room. We later discover that the Red Room, functioning as a sort of room of requirements in Harry Potter, can disguise its appearance to appeal to the different members of the family, which have all, in turn, been in it. This also highlights a lack of communication of its family members, which in appearance from the flashbacks seem very close. How is it possible that the family never addressed that there were no reading room, no tree house, no dancing studio? This lack of communication then becomes even more evident in the present, and I believe is what brings the family to suffer the most, particularly in Nell, whose fantasy of the family recognizing her pain and believing in her is exploited by Hill House. Speaking of the Red Room, everyone in the family has been in it except for Hugh. Why? Well, I believe Hill House also exploited his emotional blindness to his advantage. While showing to be caring and very much in love with his wife, his obsession to fix everything, to be the fixer, gives Hill House an advantage to manipulate him by distracting him with trying to literally fix the house of its mold without realizing that his family is falling apart. This is shown very well by the series in more than one occasion. First, with the typical horror trope of children seeing things that adults don't believe in, which is also a mistake that Olivia makes. However, while Olivia, just like in the scene of her talking with Theo mentioned before, talks to her children to understand the whys, Hugh is in the background with Mr. Dudley once again trying to understand the house of the house. Secondly, the series shows us his inability to scratch beneath the surface, to try and truly understand what Olivia's headaches represent and how these make her feel.
The more I looked, the more I knew. It was Nellie. Luke.
That's awful. What a horrible dream. And clearly you dozed off while you were reading.
Thirdly, is only when another male character makes him understand that the house can have a detrimental effect on Olivia that Hugh suggests that she leaves for a few days. However, once she does leave, he shows to be completely inadequate with basic house chores like cooking and taking care of the children if Olivia is not there to pick up the slack.
So
Guys, quiet, it's your mom.
Oh, hi, Mom.
How was your flight?
It was fine.
Ask Mom where the couscous is. I want the couscous.
I'm not seriously gonna eat this.
It's like cardboard.
Mom, like I said.
Hey, tell Daddy can't
sorry,
just
honey.
feed us cereal.
Do you want to
Call me back later when the kids have gone to sleep.
No, you have your hands full.
I can hear
Hear you, bud. Okay.
Perhaps even sadder is that at the end of the series, despite it feels like everything is tied up with a nice bow, and so we achieve a sort of resolution, the figure of the fixer is passed along the other most masculine character of the family, Stevie, showing a relapse in the same masculine frame of mind that caused Hugh to fail in the first place.
I just want to fix this.
This line connecting womanhood, sensitivity, and powers is portrayed in the present as well. Despite a rougher exterior, Shirley keeps doing pro bono work, hereby actually jeopardizing the financial stability of its own family and business, and in her own way takes care of her siblings, role that Stevie, the bigger brother, seems incapable of doing. Despite her general reluctance to feel through her touch, Theo pushes herself above and beyond to take care of children. Nell is the epitome of kindness and vulnerability, and Olivia herself died and keeps haunting Hill House because her convictions revolve exclusively around the protection of her children. Meanwhile, Stevie is shown to be suffering, but mainly from its own manipulations. The fact, for example, that he hasn't told his wife that he's had a vasectomy prior to marrying her. And once his life doesn't follow the trajectory that he has envisioned for himself, he uses the family's own dramatic past to become a famous writer. Likewise, Luke is mostly focused on himself and his addiction, making him completely oblivious of his twin sister's suffering. In comparison, Nell, although suffering a great deal, still finds time and energy to help Luke on his path to recovery. However, compared to Stevie, Luke's suffering doesn't come from selfish acts, but as it happens with the women of this series, it comes from his own sensibility. And that's because Luke is represented as the least masculine among the men of the family. For example, whereas Stevie could see a few ghosts but doesn't realize he has done so, and Hugh has never seen any ghosts, all the women in the family are constantly surrounded by them, and Luke is the only male figure who has also seen a ghost. At first we think that's Abigail, but then we discover that she's a real girl, the daughter of the Dudleys, whom Olivia murders in the Red Room. It is not a coincidence that the ghost representing Luke's fear the most is William Hill, an abnormally big and scary man whose hat becomes for the child a symbol of manhood.
Can I have the hat?
I think it's too big for you, honey.
I don't know. You'll grow into it. That is a big boy hat, all right. You want this? Well, you are a big boy now. But you know, big boys, they know the difference between what's real and what's imaginary. So what do you say, champ?
That's because The Haunting of Hill House portrays Luke as vulnerable and weak in a way, denoting a stark contrast with his father and brother. And whereas all the women in the Crane family fear their sensibility because they don't understand it, Luke fears his sensibility because he is male. And the implications of this behavior are frowned upon in a man.
I was always a scared little kid, and I thought I'd get braver as I got older, but I didn't.
As a consequence, Luke sees himself since a very young age as broken or wrong, because he doesn't act or feel like the other men around him. Luke's portrayal in The Haunting of Hill House is the perfect representation of the confusion that some modern men feel, especially when socially compared to the traditional masculinity of our culture. Apart from the obvious horror aspect of the series and its more familiar representation of trauma, it is within this gender representation of pain that The Haunting of Hill House works better, but also fails in certain parts. For example, both Olivia and Nell's viewpoints are particularly important in this analysis. Olivia's unique and powerful energy is the one that fuels Hill House even years after no one has stepped on it. And Nell's journey is deeply rooted in female pain, the fact that no one seems to take her seriously.
You okay?
Yeah, the last doctor I saw, my general practitioner, he wasn't an expert. He just told me to avoid TV before bedtime. It's nice to be listened to.
But the series falls short in representing how both characters eventually just lose their minds. Obviously, their suffering is particularly unique, and the house has a specific effect on them. But why? Why does it work so well on them? The series originally included some flashbacks into the origin story of the house, which were cut for budgeting reasons. And perhaps those would have helped in framing the story better. Because in the book, the house takes a central role in its own right and has a purpose. Ukraine was written as controlling and misogynistic, and the house took after him. That's how in the book the house not only becomes a true living being, but its actions are a consequence of its main motivation, which is oppressing women. That's one way in which the book explores and justifies the horror that it is to come. The madness of its female characters comes from an ever-present oppression, whereas in the series Olivia is eventually influenced by a house with no clear motive and a ghost, Poppy Hill, that whispers in her ear. Similarly, in the novel, the cup of star is a metaphor for female rebellion and defiance. The latter evolves in Nell as a lack of belonging in the real world. But in the Netflix adaptation, the cup of stars is a physical object, one the young Nell finds in the house and that belonged to Poppy Hill, and that later she keeps on using for no specific reason. That's how, whereas this Shirley Jackson's classic and many of her other novels explore the horror genre, linking themes of domesticity, identity, and femininity, arriving at an unsettling psychological result, Netflix's Haunting of Hill House often falls short in linking these pervasive feminine elements to its story. Sure, Carla Cugino is absolutely stunning and looks perfectly the part of the gothic mad heroine, but sometimes Netflix adaptations, just in the case of The Haunting of Hill House, do seem to pick aesthetic over substance.